Hello, my name is Evan Dorman. I am the Interpretation Assistant here at Thomas Jefferson's Poplar Forest, and welcome to the Poplar Forest Video Gazette, Episode 1, in fact. Today I'd like to tell you a little bit about a small piece of Jefferson's design here at Poplar Forest, in particular, the entablature he uses in his dining room, just upstairs. The entablature that surmounts his cube room. That design, unfortunately, is completed quite late in Jefferson's life, and so it is not part of the restoration that we have completed up to the current date. However, we do have a small sample of the design as it appeared at the time of Jefferson's death. Before I go into the entablature itself, I should break down that word, explain exactly what that means. The entablature, which is this whole piece, is composed of three pieces. This is the crown molding that would go directly underneath the ceiling. This top part would be flush with the ceiling. Beneath the crown molding is the frieze, where these figures appear. And beneath the frieze is the foot molding, which rounds out the work. And, in Jefferson's day, the entablature was composed of poplar wood with 3D sculpted figures. The sample today is a lot more modest. Those figures are paper. The rest of the form is merely foam. That does make it easy to move, which is a plus. And the complication, or the complexity, of this design is one of the major reasons why it is not completed until really quite shortly before Jefferson's death. Every wooden piece of this had to be hand-planed by Jefferson's enslaved carpenter and joiner, John Hemmings, a man who does not live at Poplar Forest year-round. Every time he comes here to work means a 2-day horseback journey for him, away from his family at Monticello. The figures, meanwhile, are crafted by a sculptor that Jefferson hires, a citizen of New York named William Coffey, and so they have to go even farther afield for this to be finished. And all of those reasons add up to the work on this proceeding perhaps a little bit more slowly than Jefferson would have wished. Now, with that out of the way, I will talk about the entablature itself. This design is not one of Jefferson's originals. Rather, he copies this design from a building that was over 1,500 years old at the time of the foundations of this house were laid. That building is the Baths of Diocletian in Rome. In the Roman original, the central figure is the human face that you see here. That is Apollo, the Roman sun god. He is also associated with works of art and with healing and the prevention of illness. And on the entablature we have here, flanking Apollo, are a pair of oxen skulls. Those ribbons that you see tied around their horns indicate they are sacrificial animals of the sort that were offered up by the Romans for the gods' intercession in their affairs. And Poplar Forest is not the only place that Jefferson utilizes this design of Diocletian. It is also present in the Northwest Piazza at Monticello and in Pavilion 1 on the lawn at the University of Virginia. Now, as a figure of the Enlightenment, Jefferson was certainly no stranger to sampling the designs of the Romans and to a lesser extent the Greeks, but I think you can argue that this particular design was a little bit more special to him. And to make that argument, I'll have to talk a little bit about the life of Diocletian himself. Diocletian was one of the later Roman emperors, not terribly well known. He came to power after a period that is known now as the 3rd century crisis. And that is a very dry, very academic term for a pretty chaotic and frightening time to be a Roman citizen. The 3rd century crisis was just over 50 years of endemic civil war. There were more claimants and usurpers and pretenders to the imperial throne during that period than at any other, to the point that in a single calendar year, 6 men were officially recognized by the Roman Senate as emperor. However, eventually the crisis passed, the wobbling empire rights itself, and when it does, Diocletian is one of the first people to hold the reins as things are slowly sliding back into normalcy. And Jefferson, who time in the political spotlight occurred after the upheaval of the American Revolution, perhaps saw a certain similarity there. If he did, that could continue when you compare the careers of the two men, because both Jefferson and Diocletian were responsible in whole or in part for fundamentally altering the nature of the government that they participated in. Jefferson did so via his authorship of the Declaration of Independence, laying out or articulating the founding principles of, or what become the founding principles of American democracy. Diocletian instituted the Tetrarchy. No more would one man hold all the power in Rome. Instead, there would be 4 emperors, 2 junior, 2 senior, each ruling over a separate part of the empire. In that way, he hoped a slide back into civil war could be averted. And lastly, both of these two men eventually surrender power and enjoy quiet retirements. Jefferson leaves the presidency after his second term, goes first to Monticello, and then, when the crowds get too much, he makes that 3-day carriage ride here to Poplar Forest. This Palladian villa surrounded by the rolling acres of his plantation. And Diocletian leaves behind the imperial city and builds for himself a villa on a farm in the Roman countryside, looking out over the Adriatic Sea. And I think more than anything else, that willing surrender of great power is something that would endear Diocletian to Jefferson, and perhaps be a deciding factor in choosing what he wants to put in the central room of his retreat here at Poplar Forest. One last thing before I let you go. Jefferson doesn't copy Diocletian exactly, at least not here. At Monticello and at UVA, he does. The frieze, everything else, is precisely as Diocletian intended it. Here, though, he makes an alteration, because in Diocletian's entablature, the only figure that appears is Apollo here. Apollo all the way around the room. But here, Jefferson instructs that those heads of Apollo be alternated with those oxen skulls. Specially made oxen skulls are split in half to cover the corners of the room, in fact. And that causes the sculptor, Mr. Coffey, some confusion, because at the same time he's making the figures for this building, he's also making the ones that will go in the pavilion at the University of Virginia. And he writes to Jefferson for clarification, asking if he had made a mistake leaving the ox skulls out at the university. Jefferson writes back to him, tells him, no, you didn't. Because, were this a public design, I would feel the need to follow the authority of antiquity, and if I may paraphrase him for a moment, but it's my house, and I can do what I like. And that is just about the only explanation he offers for that change to the design. And I should say that, well, Jefferson is fond of saying what to do, but not necessarily why. But I hope you'll consider the ties that linked him to a long-dead Roman emperor, and which might have motivated his choice of decor here at Poplar Forest.